If you seriously want to improve your wildlife photography, then you need to watch this video. When it comes to wildlife photography, there are really three key things that you have to think about. Number one is your equipment. Number two is your technical abilities to use that equipment. And number three is your ability to tell stories with that equipment. In this video, I really want to focus on storytelling in your wildlife photos. Being able to successfully tell stories is the difference between people paying attention to them and people scrolling on by. I'm sure you've heard that a picture is worth 1,000 words. When it comes to great wildlife photography, it should just be a sentence. That sentence can be very simple, or that sentence can be more complex. But no matter what, it has to contain a subject that is doing an action. Now, there's other things we can have in there, adverbs, adjectives, other objects that are in our photo. But at the heart of it, it is a subject that is doing an action. One sentence. A great wildlife photo is easy to describe. The audience is going to be able to understand exactly what you saw and picture it in their own mind's eye. In addition to that, it should be compelling and active. Something should be happening. And finally, and most importantly, you have to create an emotional connection between your subject and your audience. That emotional connection is truly critical. So to help you out there, I've included a list in the description from the Hoffman Institute. It's a list of feelings or emotions. So let's take this photo, for example. You could say, a heron hunts for fish. And that's a perfectly reasonable description of this picture. Or we can elaborate on that. A heron, his beak, just about to pierce the surface of the creek's water, tracks a small fish he's preparing to catch for breakfast. So again, this picture is very easy to describe. It has a clear subject, the heron, and there's clear action that's happening. That heron is fishing. But what about emotions? What emotions will the audience feel that will help them connect? Depending on what's happening to that person who's looking at the picture, maybe they might feel anxious. Maybe they might feel hungry. Maybe they'll feel some guilt for the fish for having to be eaten. Because the heron hasn't actually caught the fish yet in this picture, they may also feel apprehensive or even impatient. It can be hard to know what different feelings and emotions that your audience is going to bring to viewing your wildlife photos. That said, if you are interested in driving home a very specific set of emotions, then you have to be very careful in how you compose that picture. When it comes to wildlife photos, there are really two ways that we can go about capturing them. We can either have a subject in mind that we're specifically going out to photograph. We can say, I'm going to go photograph a heron catching a fish today. We may be successful in that, or we may come up empty. That's part of being a wildlife photographer. The other thing we can do is act more like a documentarian and go out and see what stories are unfolding. We can have an idea in our head of what we're going to find or what we might see or a specific angle that we're looking at. But most of the time, as wildlife photographers, we are just wandering out into the woods to see what we can find, which means we're going to encounter a lot of animals that are very common to our area. Understanding how to make compelling, active photos out of those wildlife encounters might seem like a hard task, but here's how we can accomplish that. Right now, spring is on its way in, which means a lot of baby animals. People love baby animals. Another way is to look for fun, funny, comedic situations. There's Wildlife Photography Comedy Awards. They specifically are looking for and award people for creative, funny photos of wildlife. Another key way to create that emotional connection is to be on the level with your subject. That eye-to-eye height with your subject is going to put the viewer in a place where they feel more connected. In one huge way that we can reinforce the emotions that we're trying to make folks feel when they look at our wildlife photos is by using design principles. So let's go over a couple of those. Let's first talk about leading lines. Leading lines help a viewer come into the picture. The power of leading lines is that it reminds our viewer where they should look, who the subject is, what's important in that picture. The other thing that does is it helps the viewer pay less attention to the frame. When looking at photographs, there's an edge there, right? Here's the edge, right? The edge takes a viewer's eyes out of the reality of the story. It reminds them that they're watching something, that they're consuming something, that they aren't there firsthand. Leading lines bring viewers into the subject, away from the edge, and they begin to forget that that edge is there. Another way that we can do this is with contrast. If we have darker areas around the edge of our frame, we'll also encourage the viewer to look to the middle of the frame instead of catching and paying attention to those edges. So we can essentially spotlight our subject if we catch them in light with a lot of dark area around them, and we expose for our subject rather than the entire scene. Contrast is also really powerful for one simple reason. We are all afraid of the dark. Now, you might say, no, look, Don, I'm not afraid of the dark. But the reality is, if I asked you to walk down a dark alley in some city that you're unfamiliar with, you would say, you know what, no, let's go around the block instead of walking through that alleyway. Being afraid of the dark is about self-preservation. We are descendants of generation after generation of people that didn't wander away from the fire at night. Because if you wandered away from the fire, you got eaten and you didn't have babies. So the people that stayed around the fire where it was safe, that had a healthy fear of the dark, they had babies, and therefore it's kind of genetic that we're scared of the dark. As a result of that, when we see rich, dark, deep shadows, absolute black shadows in a photograph, our sympathetic nervous system just turns on. We pay more attention. You can use that in your wildlife photos. If you have deep, dark, black shadows, people don't know what's hiding in there, and they will therefore pay more attention to your photos. But they're going to pay attention to the light parts of your photos. That's why if we spotlight our subject, if they are brighter than the background, then people understand what to look at. We're giving them a clear idea of who our subject is. That subject then just needs to be doing some sort of action. Wildlife rarely stands still for very long, so we can use motion to help accentuate the idea of that action. That motion can be implicit or explicit. We can pan with our subject and have the background a streaky blur, and that tells the viewer this bird was in flight. Likewise, if we have a picture of something frozen in the air, that motion's implied. A heron flying, even if everything is perfectly still, motion is implied. One of the most powerful tools that we have as wildlife photographers is color. Color theory is a really complex psychological science. People have favorite colors. People have colors that they react negatively to. We also apply certain emotions to different colors. Red with anger, red with passion, green with envy, green for healthy and new and natural. So the colors that you include in your photos have a huge impact on the emotional state of the people viewing those photos. In addition to that, we can use things like contrasting colors. We can also use monochromatic colors, everything in our photo being predominantly one color. We can also offset that by having our subject be a different color. So let's take complementary colors, red and green. The background of your photo is entirely green and you have a cardinal there. That cardinal is going to pop. It's also going to draw our attention. Warm colors feel like they're coming towards us, and cool colors feel like they're receding away from us. So let's recap. If you want to make more compelling, more interesting wildlife photos that people spend more time looking at, then you have to be a better storyteller. Doing so means finding a subject that is very clear, that is doing an action. It also means being able to translate that image into words And finally, of course, it means that emotional connection. If you can connect on an emotional level with the story you're telling in your wildlife photos, then people will love those photos and want to see more. I've left a bunch of resources down in the comments, including that Hoffman Institute list of feelings. There's lots of other goodies there. Be sure to check it out. Let me know if you are having struggles with telling stories or about your successes with storytelling in your wildlife photos. I'd love to hear about those as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here. If this is your first time, I hope you'll subscribe. And regardless of if you subscribe, I really hope that you'll like this video so that more people can see it. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.